Hi everyone, welcome back to season 2 of the Dirt Diaries. I know, I promised video this season and I'm holding up my end of the bargain, especially because I'm trying to keep on track of my New Year's resolution and provide video for you all. So, because we're on camera, starting now, I realized I need something to do with my hands when we're talking about really cool ancient history topics, archaeology, and more. So I thought, hey, I'll do my makeup and get ready with you guys while we talk ancient history, archaeology, mythology, mystery cults, and more. And why? Because I usually am actually FaceTiming one of my best friends or FaceTiming my sister in the morning when I get ready. So I love just talking while I get ready and do my makeup. So I thought, you know what? Let's all do it together. It's no pressure. We're two mates, history-loving friends. We got it. No pressure. And if you're new here, hi, welcome. My name is Dr. Tenendra Kallenbarger. I am an archaeologist and art historian, and I bring the ancient world to you because, no, this is not Ancient Aliens. This is the real thing, and of course, these are the Dirt Diaries. And of course, a shout out and special hello to those lounging in the villa, perusing in the library in the stacks, and snooping in the restricted section over on Patreon. So, I wanted to start season 2 off with a bang. And I went back to season 1 and saw that you all absolutely loved the Death Pits of episode, which I love that for you guys, but also was really shocked about that. And I remembered that I also promised you guys that we were going to be diving into some of the rulers who were buried in the Royal Cemetery of and that includes Queen Puabi. So that's who we're diving into today. Queen Puabi herself. Have you heard of her? No. For the life of me, I am trying to figure out when I really dove into Queen Puabi as well as the whole Royal Cemetery at And I want to call it college just to stay on like the safe side of things. Because if you've been here since season 1, you'll recall that in elementary school, at least for me, in 6th grade, we actually started learning about ancient civilizations. And that's really where I got hit with the archaeology bug, where we started learning about ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, Rome, Greece, and more. And I'll be honest, I don't remember learning about the Royal Cemetery at in 6th grade, which tracks when you think about it, because why would you teach 12-year-old children about death pits and human sacrifice? I get it. It's not for everybody, not at 12 years old. I personally would have eaten that up at 12 years old, but I get it. It's not for everybody, not for everybody. So let's call it college. But in my master's program, actually my first semester of my master's, I actually took a course focusing on the treasures of the ancient world. And that included treasures from the Royal Cemetery of including those found in Puabi's tomb. And we also focused on this partially because, again, it's a joint expedition between the Penn Museum and the British Museum. So because I went to my grad school in Philadelphia, we were located right by the Penn Museum, which still houses many of these artifacts. So that's when I can honestly say I really dove into Puabi, the treasures, and the Royal Cemetery at So today, I'll be doing my makeup at the same time, which, spoiler alert, this is the final look. And I think it's kind of fitting to do my makeup, especially when talking about Queen Puabi, because during excavations, cosmetic containers were actually recovered from her tomb. And the pigments that were still found in these containers include colors of red, a very, very dark black-brown, green, blue, purple, and white. And of course, just like today, these pigments were used to color the cheeks, the face, the eyes, the lips, and more. So for today, I wanted to go for a more gold and red, at least eye look, to really hark back to all of the gold and carnelian beads that were uncovered in her tomb. So without further ado, let's dive in. Alrighty, so a bit of a Spark Note summary from the Death Pits of episode back from season 1. This was a joint expedition done between the University of Pennsylvania's Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology in joint with the British Museum. Okay, so this is really the big schools that we're talking about. Now, the excavations at the site of they actually began back in 1922, and these excavations would continue through 1934. Now, because it is a joint expedition between the British Museum and the Penn Museum. The artifacts were actually then divided into thirds. So a third of it went to the British Museum, a third went to the Penn Museum, and the last third actually went to the Baghdad Museum in Iraq. So almost 100 years ago, on January 4th, 1928, the Penn Museum actually received a telegram from our buddy Sir Leonard Woolley. And in this telegram, he was actually announcing that he had discovered Puabi's tomb. But at the time that he is actually sending out the telegram, he had actually mistranslated her name to be Queen Puabi. But because our buddy Leonard didn't want to attract any attention from the paparazzi and other news outlets of the time, he didn't want to alert anybody of this new incredible treasure and discovery that he had found. He actually wrote the telegram in Latin. So absolutely incredible already. Truly, when I first read that, I was like, is this the Da Vinci Code? He really was like, I do not want anything leaked, which makes sense. So in order to, really make sure that he wasn't having anything linked before they were really ready for the press, he wrote it in Latin. And you might be saying, why is he, having his telegram in Latin? Well, this is because back in the day, when you would send a telegram, people would actually be the ones transcribing it. It wouldn't just go through, email today. People were actually writing this out. And if he said, I found this incredible tomb, well, that would have taken off like wildfire. So the telegram is actually written in pencil, and it reads, I found the intact tomb, stone built and vaulted over with bricks of Queen Puabi, adorned with a dress in which gems, flowers, crowns, and animal figures are woven. Tomb magnificent, with jewels and golden cups. Woolley. Just talk about a telegram that everybody wants to come across. So, because we're back in 1928. I want to kind of put this, a little bit more into the broader world and realm of archaeology at the first third of the 20th century. So what has been going on in the realm of archaeology? Well, by this point, by 1928, we're already a good 50 years from Heinrich Schliemann blowing Troy to smithereens. And yes, Troy is an actual site, not just a mythical one. But we're about 50 years removed from Schliemann, which, thank God. And he had dug Troy back in the later part of the 19th century. Now, what's also interesting is that after he was done blowing Troy to smithereens, he moved over to the Greek mainland to the site of Mycenae. And from the site of Mycenae, he actually dug what we refer to as Grave Circle A. And another archaeologist, Milo Nas, would actually come in the later half, I should say, of the 20th century, and he would dig Grave Circle B. Now, a fun fact, well, I don't know if it's fun, but it is a fact. Grave Circle B is actually dated earlier than Grave Circle A, but because A was dug first, it got the letter A. So, right around the same time, a bit before, if you will. A bit before, we actually have Sir Arthur Evans, who is digging on the island of Crete, the largest of all the Greek islands. And he is digging at the Palace of Knossos. And he, around this time, is starting to actually publish his multi-volume set on the excavations of what he terms the Palace of Minos. And, of course, about 6 years prior, if we're in 1928, 1922 is when Howard Carter discovered the tomb of the boy king. That's right. 1922 was when the world was reintroduced to Tutankhamun. So we already are having a lot of massive archaeological discoveries going on during this time and within the last century as well. Of course, it's actually starting to become more like archaeology that we see today and less antiquarianism, less treasure hunting that we saw, around the time of Schliemann. So, we're going back to with Woolley. And he didn't just find Puabi's tomb. No, no, no. That was one of over 1,800 other graves that were located near the temple to their main god, Nana. And Nana, get your mythology books out. Nana was a Mesopotamian moon god. So, from the over 1,800 tombs that Woolley had discovered, only about 16 of them he considered to be royal. Now, I don't have my PhD in math, but I did the calculations for you so you wouldn't have to. That means the other 99.992% of the graves were just simple inhumations. But these royal ones, well, they stood out to Woolley. Now, these tombs were referred to as being royal due to the architectural structures that were located inside. Now, the architectural structures were in reference to the multiple rooms or chambers that were in these tombs that held the many remains of likely sacrificed individuals who were all actually buried with the tomb's main occupant. So the main occupant would actually be the royal one. So, to make this pretty easy, these were tombs with multiple rooms that held the remains of sacrificed individuals to serve the main burial's occupant. So, how do we know that the occupants were royal or that these were even royal tombs, you might be wondering? A great question, first of all. So, we know that they're royal not only due to the vast amount of jewelry, gemstones, precious metals, semi-precious stones, all of that kind of stuff, but because some of the burial goods actually came with their names and titles on them, which as archaeologists, we love. We love that. So we don't have to fight over anything. So in some tombs, we actually have names of the ancient individuals with their official titles. Now, these were found usually on seals. And before I continue, I'm not talking about the animal. I'm talking about the administrative seals that were used throughout the ancient world, especially when we're looking at Mesopotamia, the Levant, ancient Anatolia, Egypt, and the Aegean world. All of these ancient civilizations used these seals. And these seals are small artifacts that are engraved. And they can actually take on a variety of shapes and forms. So for the Levant and Mesopotamia, really the regions that we're focusing on today, a common seal form is going to be a cylinder seal. Cylinder seals would have looked something like this. They would have been engraved with imagery on it that could have, been administrative. It could be geometric in form, taking on more of an abstract take, or it could have, divine scenes or even scenes of banqueting occurring. So the idea in the Levant and Mesopotamia, along with a lot of the ancient world, was with cylinder seals. You would actually push this into wax or clay, and then you would roll it out. By doing so, you would actually be able to see the scene that was engraved. And cylinder seals, for the most part, and other forms of seals, could mark identities with names, titles, administrative offices, and more. So if you were somebody of importance and maybe you had a ring that had your seal on it that way, you could stamp a clay tablet to show, yes, you've looked it over and you needed to send it to the next person down the line. And in my own work, I'm currently struggling with trying to figure out a seal that I'm working on and who is being represented on it. You may be wondering what the royal titles are in ancient Mesopotamia. Well, for king, we're looking at lugal. And for queen, we actually get two terms. The first of which is Eresh, and the second is Nin. Both are in reference to a female ruler, a queen. But, back when Woolley was discovering the royal cemetery of and Puabi's tomb, he read a cylinder seal that was found on Puabi to read Nin Shubad, hence Queen Shubad, in his translated telegram. Of course, we know this to now read Nin Puabi. But what's really interesting with royal titles is it's not just for a who's who of the royal family, if you will. These titles can also be used to designate gods and goddesses with their formal titles. But rather than having them say King Baal or Queen Inanna, if we're taking Mesopotamian and Levantine gods, as well as Canaanite gods with Baal. It's not going to mean king and queen in those instances. It's actually going to read as lord or lady. And what's interesting is the wife of the king wouldn't always receive the title of Nin or Eresh. But those female rulers who did receive that title, well, they would hold on to that title after the death of their husband if their husband happened to predecease them. And since this cylinder seal's discovery and the whole of Puabi's tomb was discovered, her name has always been translated to mean queen. But the identity of her husband was not known at the time. So because no man's name was referenced on that seal, Woolley began searching around the other artifacts in her tomb. And Woolley actually took one of the names of one of the untitled individuals who were mentioned by name on one of the seals in her tomb, Abarage. Now, he took Abarage to be the king and husband of Puabi. So when he said Abarage is the husband of Puabi, he also postulated that that individual was the one who was actually buried in the tomb right next door to Puabi. For reference, Puabi's tomb is actually known as Royal Tomb, which is shorthanded as RT 800. The one that's located right next door to hers is Royal Tomb 789. So Woolley, on thinking that, Abarage is the husband of her, well, it would make sense if he was going to be buried right next door to her. Now, another individual was actually believed to also be her husband as well. And just like the other, his name too was also found on a seal in her tomb. And it was argued that he was actually a member of the royal family. But his name, Lugal Zapata, doesn't always mean that the title of Lugal is used to indicate royalty. And both the identities of Abarage and Lugal Zapata, they were later questioned as, were they actually Puabi's husband? And turns out probably not. But what's interesting is in Mesopotamia is that for the most part, if you were a woman of status, you would be known in association to either your father if you were, young, so you might be known as daughter of so-and-so. And we see this actually with Enheduanna, who is the world's first recorded author. And we know her as Enheduanna, daughter of Sargon. But if you are married and somebody of status, you would then be known as so-and-so, wife of Lugal Zapata, Abarage. But what's interesting is that because we don't actually have any male name on that seal that bears Puabi's name, it's actually led many archaeologists and scholars to propose that she may have actually ruled in her own right, at least for some time. Now, it has since been proposed that she was in fact the second wife of King Meskalumdug, who he actually does show up in ancient Mesopotamian king lists. And since he does show up on some king lists, we know that he was an early ruler of the first dynasty of Ur, same time as Puabi. Now, where did he come from? Well, his name was actually found in another woman's tomb, and that tomb actually belonged to Nin Banda, who was actually believed to be Meskalumdug's first wife. Her tomb is actually Royal Tomb 1054. And because of this identity of his name, Meskalumdug, it's actually believed that Tomb 789 was his. And I also should mention, Tomb 789 is actually referred to as the king's tomb, or the king's grave, I should say. So let's enter Puabi's tomb. So as I said earlier, her tomb is actually Royal Tomb 800. And when Woolley was excavating it, he found her body in a burial chamber surrounded by 3 personal attendants. She was about 40 years old when she died and stood just under 5 feet tall, with reports stating that she was between 4'10" and 4'11". Now, I know I'm sitting now, but I am 5'7" on a good day. So she was quite a bit shorter than me. And when he discovered her, she was completely covered in gold, other precious metals like silver. She was also covered in precious stones such as lapis lazuli, carnelian, and more. And we'll actually break down how much was actually on her body in a bit. And from human remain analysis, the skull of Puabi was actually too incomplete to figure out how she died or to provide any sort of reconstruction. So anytime if you're online or on the museum's website and you see a reconstruction of her face, likely not what she looked like. That is going to be a modern interpretation, especially when it comes to her face and makeup, which is why at the Penn Museum, they have actually placed her headdress and her beaded cape, which I'm going to talk about in a second, on a black blank mannequin so that we don't get influenced by, modern day interpretations of what she may have looked like when there's no evidence to support it. But we're going deeper into her tomb. So on the map, you can actually see the ramp near the entrance. And on this ramp near the entrance, this is actually where archaeologists found human remains. And it made up bodies of 5 individuals. And this is believed to be her guards, as they also carried copper alloy daggers on their body. Now, you may be wondering, what is a copper alloy dagger? Well, archaeologists, we have to call something copper alloy if we do not know if the content of it is actually truly bronze. Because to call something bronze, it has to actually be made up of copper and tin on a 10-to-1 ratio. If it's not found to have that ratio, or it includes other metals as well, we, as archaeologists and scholars, have to refer to it as copper alloy. I know it's super nitpicky, but man, I remember in my master's and PhD program, anytime I would call something bronze, my one advisor would always be like, but is it actually bronze or is it copper alloy? So, copper alloy it is. And to Woolley, these 5 guards looked as though they were still guarding her tomb even then. So, at the edge of the ramp were the remains of a vehicle, which was believed to be a possible sledge. And near the remains of the sledge were the skeletal remains of 2 oxen and 4 individuals. Now, a 5th body was also recovered near the corner. And if you're paying attention to the map on screen, where it says that there is a pit right near that entrance, that is actually where archaeologists uncovered a wooden box, or I should say the remains of a wooden box that had lapis lazuli and shell inlay on it. And on top of the remains of the box was the human remains of another individual. Now, we also have remains of individuals found at the northeast corner of the tomb as well. But when we look at the southern portion of the grave, well, we see 2 neat lines of female attendants. And during excavations, it was found that these were the remains of 10 women, 10 female attendants, who also wore beautiful headdresses. They weren't as elaborate or ornate as that of Puabi's, but they were still beautifully made, extremely delicate, but made of gold. Other finds that have been associated with these female attendants include musical instruments such as harps and a lyre. So, where's Puabi? Great question. If you're wondering, well, we have 5 guards, 4 individuals who were on a vehicle. We have somebody else in a corner, and we have the remains of another individual who was laying on top of a wooden box, along with the remains of 10 female attendants. Doing the math, where's Puabi? Well, her inner chamber, her personal area of her tomb, is actually located in the northeast of the room, I should say. It's still in the same room. But what's interesting is the floor of her burial chamber, with the other attendants that she did have in there, the floor of that chamber was about 2 meters below the floor of where the vehicle was, where the 10 female attendants were. We're seeing a 2-meter jump between these areas. Now, inside here, we have Puabi and we have some attendants. But the most important body in here, of course, is that of Puabi. And this is where her famed cylinder seal comes into play, because it was discovered on her body, which, we love to see it, which with this cylinder seal bearing her name, it actually makes Royal Tomb 800 basically the only securely identified royal tomb and tomb in the royal cemetery at Ur. So let's talk the famed seal. So this cylinder seal was actually made of lapis lazuli, meaning it is a beautiful dark blue color. And the design is actually divided into two parts, two registers, really. We have an upper register and a lower register. Now, the upper register includes the depiction of a seated female figure. And this female figure is portrayed larger than everybody else. In the realm of archaeology and art history, we often refer to this as the hierarchy of scale. More important individuals are going to be depicted larger than everybody else in the scene. And this figure, she's also holding a drinking cup. And many actually believe that this is a depiction of the queen herself. Now, behind her, the scene also includes another female figure, likely a female attendant, who stands behind the seats. And the upper register also includes a group of unidentified males. And the inscription to the left in the two lines actually reads Queen Puabi or Nin Puabi. The lower portion of the scene consists of a seated male along with attendants who offer the seated man a drinking cup. Now, as I said earlier, she was buried with an incredible amount of jewelry, precious stones, and more. She also had her famed floral golden headdress that is now in the Pennsylvania Museum's collection. And as Woolley described it himself, quote, "The whole of the upper part of the queen's body was covered with beads of gold, silver, lapis lazuli, carnelian, and agate. They were astonishingly numerous and of exceptional fine quality," end quote. She wore gold rings, one on each finger. And around her waist was a intricately beaded belt that may have been one very large wide belt or two belts that were made out of beautiful carnelian beads that ended in golden circular rings. At her right shoulder were 3 golden pins that likely attached her garments to one another. And from each of these golden pins that were at her shoulder were 3 lapis lazuli cylinder seals, including the one we just talked about, where we finally were reintroduced to the queen herself, Puabi. And what's interesting about her name is that her name is not found in any historical king lists. But again, it is of note that she did hold the title of Nin, and considering that there's no male mentioned on this seal, she may have ruled on her own. Now, this incredible headdress was made up of wreaths of gold, beads of lapis, carnelian, and to hold it all together to her hair, likely a wig, was a beautiful floral golden comb. And to make this headdress possible, it was actually made up of more than 12 meters, more than 30 feet of golden ribbon. Yes, golden ribbon. Oh, it's so thin and so delicate and just of exquisite quality. Ancient artisans are just, their work is just unprecedented and just, there's nothing like it in the ancient world. And even today, ancient artisans and jewelers, oh, I have no words for it. And together, this entire massive headdress weighed around 2.5 kilograms, so around 5 pounds. Now, the imagery that's depicted on this headdress is derived and inspired by the natural world. So we have 4 wreaths that held willow and poplar leaves that were, of course, made of gold. And the support comb that I mentioned earlier was topped with 7 golden flowers with lapis centers. Beads and amulets of bulls, calves, and even fish were also found nearby. And all of this natural world imagery may suggest an ancient Mesopotamian myth, one that dealt with 2 individuals, the god Dumuzi and the goddess Inanna, who, of course, in mythology together represent a divine couple, and their union, in some stories, can represent the cycles of life and death. So with all of this, natural world motifs and iconography that are found on her headdress and on the amulets surrounding her body, it would make a lot of sense if it was, inspired by the natural world and the seasonal change of life, death, and rebirth again. She also wore massive golden earrings that likely would have, sat or rested on her shoulders. And back in the day, growing up, I used to wear massive earrings. So I could not even imagine how heavy that must have felt for the queen to wear. She also wore several necklaces, a beaded wrist cuff, and she also had a circlet over her right knee. And on her body, archaeologists also discovered more pendants featuring bulls, goats, male and female date palm branches, and other fruits that likely made up more necklaces. But more impressive than that were the thousands of beads that covered her body. There were so many beads found on her body, on her torso, that now more than 80 individual strands have been made from all of these beads. And the beads and the gold that were found on her upper body weighed nearly 3.5 kilograms, which is around 7.5 pounds. Now, when it was being excavated, Woolley actually described this as a cape of beads. And remember those belts or belt that I was talking about earlier? Yeah, it was made of beads, alternating in color. And they would alternate between yellow from the gold, red from the carnelian, and blue from the lapis lazuli. All right, I'm going to line my eyes off screen because I can't talk and line at the same time. I'll be right back. Now, she also wore a necklace, more like a choker. And, of course, it was beaded, but the center pendant was an open work rosette. And rosettes in the ancient world are a very common motif. We actually see rosettes show up not only in Mesopotamia, we also see it in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. We also see it in the Aegean, and, of course, to the south in Egypt. If you're a curious little kitty cat like I am, you may be wondering, where are all of the sources or the origins of all of these precious stones and beads and goods? Well, all of the carnelian from the royal cemetery at Ur and, of course, from the tomb of Puabi, all the carnelian actually comes from the Indus Valley. And we actually have well-documented trade between the Indus Valley and Mesopotamia. Lapis lazuli, the beautiful blue stone, well, that can come from one of about 2 places that were active during this time. So it either came from the Chagai Hills of Pakistani Baluchistan or from Badakhshan in modern-day Afghanistan. Both of these areas had mines operating back during this time, back during the early dynastic period of Mesopotamia. And, of course, we got carnelian and we have lapis lazuli. What's next but gold? And gold, if you've been here a while, you know my opinions about gold. It's not as much of a problem child in the ancient metals sphere and ancient metals trade as much as tin is, but gold is up there because gold sources are hard to narrow down. And the word problem gets that much harder when we realize that there are no known gold deposits in Mesopotamia. But we do have later Sumerian texts that tell us that gold reached this area through a number of ways. Some are real and therefore helpful. Some not so much. The not so much category includes places that are mythical. That's right. Mythical gold deposits and places. So in this mythical category, we have the city of Arata, as well as a mythical land referred to as the Harlu. And from scholarship, it's believed that both of these locations, while mythical, may actually be based on locations in Iran. But for the real world supplies, we know that gold was making its way to this region of the world by way of ancient Anatolia, so modern day Turkey, as well as through the Gulf. And gold is also hard to narrow down because we have different types of gold. We have platinum bearing gold, we have non-platinum bearing gold, we have alluvial gold, and more. And while, yes, we can be aware of trade routes that include how gold was getting to certain areas and regions of the world, when we're actually testing gold, it becomes that much harder when you take into account how many pieces of gold could have actually been remelted down and reused and recycled into other artifacts and more. So, gold, easier than tin, but not as easy as copper. Copper, if you've been here long enough and you listen to the Uluburun shipwreck episode, copper is the perfect metal. We get basically individualized metallurgical fingerprints from specific mines, so we know exactly where copper is coming from in the Bronze Age. Now, another big question, probably bigger than the ancient trade of elite objects and materials, is did the attendants, guards, and more go willingly into the afterlife with their queen, king, or other royal leader, or were they killed or part of human sacrifice? We talked a bit about this on the Death Pits of episode from season 1. And really, it comes back to the lack of disturbance in the evidence, especially from the remains of the 10 female attendants, especially in Puabi's tomb. So what do I mean by this? When archaeologists were digging, there was no disturbance in the ground that would suggest that once the individual was sitting or laying down, that they moved after that. So where they dug them up was where they were placed. And because archaeologists and scholars who were digging right there, because they, believed that the lack of disturbance meant that they were sitting or laying down already, Woolley took this a little bit further, if you will. And he took this to mean that these attendants may have taken a poison or even a sedative. Now, I say poison or sedative for two different reasons. A sedative was proposed because if they were asleep, the female attendants who had taken it, once they were asleep, their bodies then could have been moved into the positions that we later found them in. Okay, that makes sense. And that after their bodies were arranged into the two neat lines, that the tomb would have actually been filled over. And because they would have been putting dirt back onto these attendants, guards, and more, that would have actually resulted in suffocation and then their death. Now, if it were poison, this is one of, Woolley's more dramatized stories and proposals. Now, if it were poison, it's actually really difficult to assess what we're seeing in the ground then, because it doesn't really match how we know poison to interact with the human body. So if we look at more extreme options like cyanide or hemlock, well, the two rows that were neatly lined up, they wouldn't have remained that way. Why? Because once ingested, the body would have actually writhed and contorted in ways that would have also affected the headdresses and the jewelry and other artifacts located next to them. So whether or not they went willingly or were coerced is still a mystery today. And at the beginning, I mentioned that, of course, this is a joint expedition between the British Museum and the Penn Museum, and that the other third of the artifacts went to the Iraq Museum in Baghdad. Unfortunately, that brings us to 2003, where the Iraq Museum in Baghdad was ransacked, and over 170,000 artifacts went missing. Now, the 170,000 artifacts were from one of the cradles of civilization in the ancient world. This was from Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. Poof, gone. And if you ever want to be really sad and you want to look over the artifacts that are still missing or even believed to be completely destroyed, it really reads like a who's who list of Near Eastern archaeology, Near Eastern kings, queens, rulers, and more. Now, among the thousands of pieces that were taken, one of them comes directly from Puabi's tomb, and that is the golden harp of Now, it was a harp that had a bull's head that was made out of solid gold on it, and it was known as Queen Puabi's golden harp of Now, in the wake of the looting, the bull's head was actually believed to be missing, that somebody took it, but the harp itself was destroyed, unfortunately. But we actually do know of other lyres that were, of course, found in Puabi's tomb. And Woolley actually discovered 4 within her tomb. So the 4 were actually dubbed Puabi's lyre, the golden lyre, the bull-headed lyre, and the silver lyre. And at over 4,000 years old, these are the world's oldest string instruments ever discovered to date. So if you ever find yourself in Philadelphia, go ahead and check out the Penn Museum that actually still has the artifacts and grave goods from not only Queen Puabi's tomb, but from the Royal Cemetery at And for the Penn Museum specifically, that is where the monumental golden headdress of Puabi is today, along with the restrung beaded cape that Woolley found. We also actually have the goat in the thicket. The other matching one from that one, from the King's grave, is actually in the British Museum, which is the ram in the thicket. So there you have it, Queen Puabi. I wish we knew a little bit more about her, not just, from her tomb and all of the incredible grave goods, which we are so lucky to still have. But I wish we knew the role that she played in politics in, the early dynasty of Like, this is one of the cradles of civilization. She is from the early dynastic 3 period, and to know what role she played as queen. Did she rule on her own? God, I just wish we knew more about her in life and not just from her death. And it's a crazy reminder that it was until 1928 that the world was reintroduced to this monumental woman. Before this, we had no idea that she existed, that she may have ruled in her own right, and more. We had no idea about the Royal Cemetery of So, let me know what you want to hear about this season on the Dirt Diaries. I have so many fun topics to cover, but let me know if there's any specific stories, figures in ancient history that you want me to cover. So, as I always say, keep your books open, stay curious, and I'll see you guys next time on the Dirt Diaries.